The letter didn't arrive by post. It was slid under Dr. Eliza Renn's apartment door at 3:17 a.m., the hour when the city forgets its promises. The envelope was hospital wax white, the kind they used before everything went to email and liability. Inside, a folded census sheet from Ashfall State Psychiatric Hospital, dated November 12, 1968, and a pencil mark that circled a line halfway down. Patient 413, D. Renn, status transferred. Unrecorded. Eliza sat on her kitchen floor until the kettle screamed long enough to embarrass them both. Her father's name wasn't D. Renn. He'd never been a patient anywhere. He'd been a locked room. When he died 2 years ago, the obituary used more adjectives than facts and called him private. At the bottom of the census sheet, in ink that bled like it had decided to, a note waited. The ward is waking. Bring a recorder. Bring a witness. Ma'am. Ashfall had been shuttered since the 80s. The state sold the land to a developer who bulldozed the outer wards, and then discovered the ground gave back what it didn't want. They left the central complex standing like a bad tooth. If you took the old service road and didn't mind the keep out signs, you could still see the main, the nurses' annex, and the infamous Ward H, Ashfall Ward, where they sent the patients the treatments couldn't wash clean. Eliza was a forensic psychiatrist who did not believe in curses, only patterns. She packed a field recorder, 3 batteries, a fountain pen because it felt like a spine, and the one thing she'd never shown anyone, the cassette labeled Father, 1976, the only recording of his voice she owned. She texted Marin, the journalist who turned FOIA requests into weapons, and Marin texted back a skull, a flashlight, and pick me up in 20. By dawn, the hospital rose out of the fog like a verdict. The windows were blind, the brickwork stained, the grounds choked with milkweed and apology. The sign at the gate read, Ashfall State Hospital. And then, beneath in spray paint, we are still here. Eliza palmed the census sheet like a warrant and walked toward the door that should not have been unlocked. It was. The lobby smelled of iodine that had married time and settled down unhappily. Dust hung in the light like ash. On the wall, a corkboard furred with notices that refused to yellow. Group canceled. Hydrotherapy closed for maintenance. Do not admit without orders. Ward H. Above the desk, the clock had no hands, just a printed instruction under the glass. Observe. Marin flipped open a notebook. Okay, she said, voice trying to be flippant and landing in reverent. Ground rules. If a cop asks, I'm your cousin. If a ghost asks, I'm your doctor. Ghosts don't ask, Eliza said. They tell. Hot. Marin grinned and then sobered. You okay? My father's initials are all over these archives, Eliza said, holding up the census sheet. But my father never worked here. They sent a D. Renn to Ward H. Marin scanned the paper. Status. Transferred unrecorded. That's not a status. That's a shrug in calligraphy. At the end of the corridor, double doors stood ajar. A sign above them. Intake. Eliza pushed through. Her recorder clicked alive. Files lay open on a long counter. Thick manila jackets of lives reduced to ink. On the wall, a glass-fronted staff rota still held names on index cards, slid into brass tracks. Dr. Albright, Dr. M. Lane. At Peneligan. Eliza's throat tightened. The hospital was a confluence of things she'd spent years learning to ignore. A metal tray by the window held objects arranged with surgical affection. A set of wrist straps, a keyring, a ring of tags stamped H, and a small tin labeled Echoes in a hand that liked tidy letters. Marin lifted the tin's lid, sniffed. Lavender, she said, or something pretending. Eliza pressed the intercom button for Ward H. The speaker hissed, and underneath the static, a voice said, very distinctly, "Observe." The corridor to Ward H sloped down. Fluorescent tubes above flickered the way cheap memory does. At the end, a steel door wore a window like an accusation. Behind the glass, darkness waited in a posture that knew you were there. The lock turned under Eliza's hand, as if someone had been waiting on the other side to make it easy. Marin mouthed, "We're idiots," and Eliza agreed by not disagreeing. They stepped in. Ward H was a long, spined thing shaped like shame. 8 patient rooms, 4 aside, each with a barred window and a cot and the legacy of someone's last night. The nursing station at the end had a broken swing-arm lamp and a coffee cup fossilized into the desk. The walls wore their own history, layers of paint like sediment, colors of different decades showing through where hands had touched often. Behind the nursing desk, a whiteboard still bore the day's plan. H1. Hydro 10 o'clock. H2. Insulin. H3. ECT consult. H4. Quiet. H5. Privileged. H6. Watch. H7. Wash. 8-8. Transferred. What do you make of privileged? Marin asked, photographing everything. Time outside the ward, or cigarettes, or not being strapped, Eliza said. Depends on the cruelty of the budget. A clipboard hung from a nail. Eliza lifted it. The H8 chart wore its notes in a hand she recognized from the census sheet. The same careful ink. Patient name line, D. Renn. Diagnosis, acute schizoaffective disorder. Age, 21. Notes, refuses to speak his name. Insists he was admitted wrong. Transfer order signed by Dr. Lane. My father wasn't 21 in 1968, Eliza said, pulse skittering. He would have been 4. Maybe D. Renn wasn't your father, Marin said gently. Maybe he was your father's. I don't know. Shadow. Patient 0 for a family secret. Eliza thumbed the edge of the page. My father kept a tape. 1 tape from 1976. She slid the cassette from her bag. He wrote father on it like he needed to remind himself who he was. In Ward H, Marin said, we call that a clue. Room H3's door stood ajar. Inside, the cot had been stripped down to wire. On the wall, a grid of pencil lines scratched up to shoulder height. A tally of seconds someone needed kept. A phrase repeated under the counting. I looked back only once. Eliza traced the letters, very gently, with a gloved finger. From down the hall, a soft sound. Not a voice, a change in the lights, as if the power remembered it had been a heartbeat. Do you hear that? Eliza asked. Marin stilled. Like a bell? The speaker above the nursing station coughed static. Then, clear as a ward note, rounds. The fluorescents went steadier, one by one down the hall. The air grew cooler, the way hallways do when someone in charge walks in. Footsteps crossed the threshold, but no one came. "Observe," said the intercom again, and Eliza realized she was being given an order she had trained a decade to follow. She clicked the recorder on. The Hydro Suite lived behind a door with a cheerful painted wave. The paint had peeled into a grin. Inside, 2 enamel tubs, a shower with a metal chair, a cabinet that had held towels when towels still had permission to be soft. On the wall, a laminated safety protocol insisted on witnesses and timing and consent. Underneath, someone had written in a felt tip that refused to die. "No one you did this to forgave you." Eliza set the recorder on the cabinet and turned a faucet. Water coughed and spat rust and then learned to be clear. The room warmed around the sound. Marin checked her watch and began a running commentary for the file, because silence in places like this ferments. "Hydrotherapy was sold as kindness," Eliza said, voicing what she taught residents. "Warm water for agitation. Cold immersion for acute psychosis. It was care with a stopwatch." She turned off the tap. The pipes settled with a sigh that traveled the walls. From somewhere behind the tile, a voice drifted, not words, a half-remembered melody. A man singing under his breath because it keeps him from breaking. Eliza's throat closed. It was her father's tune, the one he hummed when the weather changed. She pressed her ear to the tile. "Hello?" she said softly. "Can you hear me?" The singing stopped. Then the lights flicked twice. The shower chair scraped, just an inch. The door to the corridor opened without a hand. Marin stood in the threshold, recorder up, eyes steady the way you want a friend's to be. "Was that him?" she asked. Eliza nodded once. "It's impossible. Lucky for us, impossible has a forwarding address." Marin pointed at the tiles. Sound came through the wall. "There's space back there." "Maintenance tunnel?" They found the hatch behind a loose panel in H6, a low, square door that meant staff only, in a dialect of architecture older than regulations. The tunnel beyond ran the length of Ward H. Pipework, wiring, a shelf built into brick holding a line of objects set down as if during a hurried inventory. A comb, a cracked pair of spectacles, a rosary with 3 beads missing, a folded paper cap like you make for children, a small tin labeled Echoes. Marin popped the tin. "Inside, observe," the intercom said from nowhere, soft as breath. Eliza and Marin killed their flashlights. The tunnel filled with movement. The kind of movement hospitals make when they are doing work that is not for the waiting room. Footsteps, wheels, the metallic bark of a cart hitting a threshold. A voice. "Patient D. Renn, transfer order signed, Ward H." Eliza's hands shook. She reached blind and found Marin's sleeve, and Marin let her hold on, because some witness work is manual. The movement passed. The lights came back. The objects on the shelf had changed order. The spectacles sat closer to the tin. A cassette lay where the comb had been, a Maxell with a paper label in neat ink. Father, 1976. Eliza picked it up with both hands. "My father's tape," she whispered. "It was at home. I packed it. In her bag. The cassette case sat empty. Ward H had rewritten which before belonged to which after. At the far end of the tunnel, A door just locked with a chain hung open, as if the last person through had been interrupted by an apology. A brass plaque above the lintel named the space beyond, Ashfall Ward, H. The ward beyond the ward was a ring, 8 doors around a central nurses' station that had grown thinner with budget cuts and decades. Here, the paint wasn't peeling. It was simply wrong, like someone had guessed the color from memory. On the glass of the station, 5 chalked words in a hand that didn't like being interrupted. No admissions after midnight. On the floor, tape lines marked where beds had once been rolled and where they were not allowed. In the corner, an ECT machine sat under an oily tarpaulin that didn't fit, its cord unplugged and coiled with the passivity of a snake that knows it is more symbolic than useful. The smell in the air was not dust. It was ozone. Eliza set the cassette in her handheld recorder and pressed play. The tape whirred. Then a man's voice, younger than memory and more careful, filled the ward. If you're listening, it means the door opened again. A pause, a breath that did not want to be heard. My name is, and then, static, as if the name were a thing the ward ate. They brought a boy in. He had my last name. He told me he was me before I learned to keep my mouth shut. A scrape of chair legs. He said the ward is a loop. He said transfers don't leave. They go to an earlier floor. Marin's eyes met Eliza's. Like a Mobius shift. The recording crackled. If you are the me that is older, or my daughter listening like a criminal, know this. Ward H asks for witnesses. It doesn't let them testify, but it keeps the recordings. A sound like knuckles on wood. Observe. That's how you open the door. A second voice broke in. Female, brisk, medical. Dr. Renn, step out of the room. No, the younger man said. You'll lose me if I do. Static ate the next 30 seconds. Then, if you bring my recording to where I learned to be your father, maybe time will be rude enough to correct me. The tape clicked. End. Marin blew out a breath. Your father worked here, she said, not cruel. Or he worked against here. The census says he was a patient, Eliza said. He says he was a doctor. The ward says both. That means one is a way to say the other. She set the recorder on the nurse's window, turned to the ring of doors. On H8, a slip of paper hung crooked in the clip. A single line in pencil. Transfer on bell. What bell? Marin asked. As if polite, the intercom paged. Code blue, Ward H, transfer on bell. From deep in the hospital, a bell began to ring. Not a chime, not machinery. The sound you get when metal gives up being useful and becomes history. Eliza grabbed Marin's wrist. We don't let the chart write him again. How? We go where they would take him. Eliza pointed to the painted tape lines and the door to the corridor beyond. We walk the transfer path. We watch. We refuse to write the last line. Marin squared her shoulders. I've refused worse. They stepped into the corridor as the bell tolled again. Closer now, and wrong, and hungry. Behind them, in the nurse's station, the recorder kept recording. On it, very softly, a man's voice sang the tune her father used when the weather changed. And Ward H went to collect its midnight. The bell tolled again. Heavy, deliberate, older than the hospital itself. It echoed through the corridor in pulses that seemed to slow the heart. Inside, a ward existed as it might have in the 1940s. Wrought iron beds, leather restraints, cabinets filled with glass syringes and handwritten ledgers. A nurse in a starched uniform passed through the hall, not looking at them, her feet making no sound. She vanished through the far wall, like a reel of film, skipping ahead. "This isn't a haunting," Marin said, raising her camera. "It's a loop, and loops want to be completed," Eliza murmured. They moved deeper, past rooms where doctors argued over diagnoses in Latin, past therapy rooms where patients screamed into basins of ice water, past records of treatments outlawed decades ago. Each level was a page torn from the hospital's history, a floor that shouldn't exist but refused to be forgotten. And then, at -13, they found it. A door marked D. Renn. The bell rang once more, and the door opened. The room was small and empty, but for a single bed, a nightstand, and a wall mirror cracked in 3 places. A young man sat on the bed, his wrists wrapped in hospital gauze, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Eliza," Marin whispered. "It's him." The resemblance was undeniable. The slope of the shoulders, the way he tapped his finger against his leg, the same rhythm Eliza's father had done absent-mindedly all her life. "Are you Daniel Renn?" she asked, stepping closer. The man didn't look up. "Not anymore. Were you transferred here?" "They said it was a transfer, but it's not a place. It's a decision." He finally raised his gaze, and Eliza's heart stopped. His eyes were her father's, younger, sharper, but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here, Eliza." Her breath caught. "You know who I am?" "I know who I was. I know I left something behind." He nodded toward the mirror. "It's still in there." Eliza approached the mirror. Behind the fractured glass, shadows moved. Scenes from another life. A doctor injecting something into a patient's arm. A man screaming that he was not himself. And a child, a small boy, watching from a doorway. Her father's voice echoed from somewhere far away. "Observe, but never write the chart." "Do you want to leave this place?" Eliza asked. The man shook his head slowly. "I'm not supposed to. If I leave, the loop collapses. Someone has to remember. Someone has to stay." "You don't have to be the one," she said. "I'm here now." The bell tolled again. The man's form flickered like an old recording. "Then you'll have to finish what I couldn't." The hallway beyond the room was filled with noise now. Alarms, footsteps, the hum of machinery decades out of use. Figures in white coats rushed past without seeing them. Somewhere above, a voice shouted, "Patient Renn, transfer complete." Marin grabbed Eliza's arm. "They're writing it again. The admission, the transfer, the whole story." "We have to stop them," Eliza said. "We have to refuse the chart." "How?" Her eyes fell on the patient logbook, open on the nurse's desk. "Rewriting the narrative," she said. "If there's no record, the loop can't close." The bell tolled again, but weaker now, distant, like it was losing its grip on the world. The hallway around them shimmered, the doors fading into blank walls, the floor flattening into concrete. The younger version of her father appeared at the far end of the corridor. "It's working," he said, his voice echoing like it came from a dream. "You're breaking the admission cycle. "Then help me finish it," Eliza shouted. He nodded once and vanished. The corridor twisted like a Mobius strip, folding back into itself. One final door appeared at the end, marked discharge. The bell tolled for the last time, softer than a heartbeat. "This is it," Marin said. "The way out." Eliza hesitated. "If we leave, he might be trapped here." Marin stepped closer. "Or he's already gone, and you staying won't change that." Eliza took a deep breath and walked through the door. Light swallowed her. Not hospital light, not the pale glow of institutional lamps, but daylight, warm, clean, real. She stumbled forward and nearly fell against the rusted gate of Ashfall Hospital. Marin stood beside her, blinking in the morning sun. The building behind them was silent, the windows empty. The bell had stopped ringing. On the ground near the gate, something small and metallic glimmered. Eliza picked it up. It was a hospital bracelet. D. Renn, discharged. Her father's handwriting on the back. "Observe, and then leave." Tears blurred her vision. "He did it," she whispered. "He let go." Marin placed a hand on her shoulder. "And now you can too." As they walked away from Ashfall, the wind stirred the weeds by the entrance. For a moment, Eliza swore she heard humming, the same quiet melody her father had always sung when the weather changed. But when she turned, the hospital was gone. 6 months later, Eliza published Ashfall, a case history of a vanishing institution. It was hailed as a landmark study of trauma, memory, and institutional abuse. The final chapter contained no conclusions, only transcripts, photographs, and one phrase repeated 13 times. "I looked back only once." On the last page, she taped a small, weathered patient bracelet with the name nearly worn away. Underneath, she wrote, "For D. Renn, who observed, so I could leave." And somewhere beyond pages and time, the ward that had consumed so many finally exhaled. It was empty. It was over. It was free.